But reasoning is a distinctive, different thing than a language model. They're just not the same thing. But it's very tempting to listen to ChatGPT and think that it is reasoning in the way you and I mean it. But it certainly has the illusion of reasoning, and if it has its own form of reasoning, that's fine. But it's not what we mean when we think about reasoning.
Welcome to Ctrl Alt AI. I'm Dimitri Sirota on the show. I sit down with the leading voices of what's next in AI, data, and risk. We go beyond the buzz to unpack the real-world strategies shaping the future. Your shortcut to clarity in a world built on data and driven by intelligence. I'd like to welcome to the podcast Joe Miller, who will be doing our inaugural podcast on kind of some challenges and opportunities around AI. So Joe, welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So Joe, I think you have an interesting story one interesting story is the fact that, like myself, you have a background in physics. So maybe you could chat a little bit about that and how that kind of prepared you for the new AI world. Probably read a little bit of Isaac Asimov in your background. But I think also very, very importantly, Joe, you have a story that I think a lot of founders are going through right now, where they're meaningfully changing their business to reflect not just using AI, but to become more agentic. So maybe let's start with just a background. Tell us, very importantly, about what you did in physics and what you read in Isaac Asimov, and we'll kind of pivot a little bit.
Sounds good. I am originally a physicist by training. I studied physics and economics at Berkeley, and then I went and did my PhD at Cornell in biophysics. I also spent about 3 years as a nuclear physicist at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs in between that period of time as well. Physics is like sort of the great option that you could have. Like if you study physics, you have a pretty good working theory of most subjects. And I think the main reason is because it teaches you how to model the world, and it teaches you how to think about like how do you build structures out of observational data and unstructured types of things. And in the AI space, that's sort of like the name of the game right now is like, how do you, if you care about reasoning and things like that, which is a hot topic right now in AI, of course, it really comes down to like, how are you structuring knowledge? How do you model knowledge? How do you model reasoning of declarative facts and procedural knowledge and all of the different types and such? And I think that background lends itself well actually to thinking abstractly about those sorts of topics and then reasoning from first principles in them. Now, like how much practical value that like, am I doing nuclear physics in my LLM? No, I'm not, nor would I trust it to do so. I'm also a serial entrepreneur, so because physics can't pay the bills, so you got to do something, to pay the mortgage. With 4 other co-founders, we started Vivun 8 years ago or something like that. And Vivun was an AI first company. We were always AI driven, but this was in 2017, 18, this kind of space. I was actually working at Bridgewater Associates at the time, running an AI team there, building expert knowledge systems. And the thing that was going on during that time is you had this kind of early stage of LLMs. You had like the Berts and the Ernies, and when AI used to be clever and funny, or at least they thought so. Those sorts of era, and we were trying to use those types of tools to do meaningful work, but they just weren't that good. Frankly, it just wasn't that good. It was interesting, there was little pockets of like kind of magic going on, but practically when you try to deliver some sort of product with it, it just wasn't particularly good. But the thing that was good is that, for the last, call it 50 years now, we've known how to build good expert knowledge representations. We know how to represent domain specific knowledge. It's just the problem was that you just couldn't really engage with it in a natural sort of UX way, like a way that you would want a world-class product to operate. And then I think my personal view is that the reason that fact basically leads to, the whole 20 teens of just the proliferation of dashboard SaaS companies. If you just think about for a second, like what is a dashboard? It's basically like a developer or a company saying, these are the questions that you are going to ask. Here is the data that you can use to answer them. And so you have to a priori sort of know what the user wants to investigate, and then you could build data visualizations to help them down that path. But when LLMs came around, 2 of the co-founders are Matt Darrow and John Bruce, and they were both pre-sales engineers at various companies, Quora and other places, Signal Effects and tech shops like this. And pre-sales was sort of an interesting role because it sits between the engineering and the sales team. It's sort of like your technical sales leader, right? And as obviously software is eating the world and all of that, all product sales become technical sales. So you end up having this specialization sitting right in the middle that is basically underserved. And so Vivun was the first enterprise SaaS company to build a piece of software for that role, for that group of people to sit between, engineering and the technical side of sales. And so that's what we were doing. And I think it's like that data is still, that thesis, that original thesis is still meaningful. That, if you think about like how should I pivot my company? What's the best way to respond to customer feedback, et cetera? Understanding why you are winning or not winning based from a technical lens, I think is the most important thing you could possibly do. And then, I think GPT-3 kind of came out, and we were like, even at 2, it was still pretty bad. It was really bad. I mean, 3 was sort of bad, but there was like an aha moment where you're like, oh, wait, this actually might work. And I'll be the first to admit that I did not think it was going to work. I did not think, you could just stack transformers and like suddenly you would get coherent language models out. So I was impressed as well. And I was like, but that sort of light bulb that went off for us was like, oh, this is going to get there. Like it wasn't there yet, but you could see that like, this is going to work. And the sort of revelation of that was like, this is going to solve that UX problem. So we already have good expert knowledge. I sat with Matt and John and sort of codified the domain knowledge of technical sales leaders and all of that into a graph. And so it's literally like nodes and edges and such, but you can represent a lot of powerful knowledge representation that way. And so we already had that, but we had no way to engage with it. The user couldn't ask questions of that brain. We had to go build dashboards. With the LLM, you could see that like, oh, this is the mouthpiece. This is the UX that allows people to speak to that brain through natural language and get back responses in natural language. And that was the revelation sort of thing that we saw. The second thing I would say is that I sort of also made a prediction that I was like, I think this technology is people are going to overdo it. They're going to think that like, because it can have coherent output in long form and write paragraphs and such, that people will think that it is reasoning. But reasoning is a distinctive, different thing than a language model. They're just not the same thing. Yeah. But it's very tempting to hear, to listen to ChatGPT and think that it is reasoning in the way you and I mean it, But it certainly has the illusion of reasoning, and if it has its own form of reasoning, that's fine. But it's not what we mean when we think about reasoning. And I sort of knew that like that was going to lead to all these problems that happen in knowledge representation for 50, 60 years that we've already known about. We sort of made a big bet that it wasn't that LLMs were going to run into that wall, and that what we should do is go down this path, which was a lot more work up front, but it was a way of like allowing this brain that was declared up a priori. It was all the domain knowledge. We got to specify, what do we mean by each of these words? What do they imply when they change about other pieces of knowledge? And sort of really have a first-class, brain, first-class knowledge representation in that way. And then use the LLM as more of like a filler and interfacing with that thing. So we do the reasoning in sort of an old-fashioned way, if you will, and then we use the LLM to sort of augment that and get the UX magic out of it. And I think when GPT-5 came out, you could see that like, we're starting to hit a plateau. It's still very impressive. It's still incredible and amazing, but it's really like a miracle of modern day. But it is also still not able to do like long form reasoning. It still makes ambiguity errors, all of that kind of stuff. And so, we call them hallucinations, but it's not really hallucinations. It's just the math of the way that it's built. So, it's really worked out well for us. And now we have, I think we have a little bit of a lead in the market of this agentic push here, because we built the cognition model that way.
Sure. So let me maybe unpack a few things kind of for the audience, just to kind of understand kind of your journey, right? So you've been at this since I think you said 2018, building this kind of B2B vertical SaaS for pre-sales engineers, helping their bosses understand how productive they are, but probably getting them the right kind of information. And in the background, you're building a bit of a knowledge system inadvertently. Along comes AI. First 2 didn't impress you very much. 3, 5 maybe impressed you a little bit more. And you said, hey, there's an opportunity to refactor how our pre-sales engineers are interacting with our knowledge base. Mm-hmm. Let's create a prompt-based interface where they could basically use it as an assistant, an oracle, if you will. And so that seems like the first kind of sequence is really about how do you make it easier so you're not limited to the normal kind of database, kind of Tableau format where everything's basically report, but create a human-like interaction. So maybe not fully agentic per se, but really more kind of that LLM kind of prompt-based interface into the knowledge base. Is that a kind of a fair?
Yeah, I think I'd say that there's an augmented with a couple points. One is like when you think about an agent, people tend to just say, okay, like you have this LLM, you have this engagement of it, but then you have this memory layer, you have these tool calls, a set of tool calls, and the agent needs to be able to make autonomous decision making. Like it needs to decide where to go. Because of the way we built the architecture initially, we were sort of always in an agentic world because there's tool calls to that graph to figure out what is the knowledge that is happening. How do I go reason about that? Should I go out to the web? Do I have enough knowledge? Is my knowledge valid? Is it out of date? Is it stale? Et cetera, et cetera. Is it answering the question? What does a good answer look like? So it has to be able to do all of those sort of autonomous decisions, and then also has to do the work. So like we did not start out with the idea that we were going to build an agent that is you're going to throw a bunch of documents and it's going to like help you recall facts out of that document. That to me is not an agent. That is like a search function. And there's lots of agents that, they're basically search functions. And there's nothing wrong with that for like, there may be value in that in certain spaces. But if you're in sales and you're trying to work a deal and you're saying, okay, what do I need to do to get the deal from this stage to that stage? Like, what is the knowledge that I have to go collect here so that we are set up for success in this next stage? There's work to be done. You got to go build solution documents. You got to go, do discovery calls. You got to go run demos. You got to go do stuff. You got to go make work product. And that work product has quality and different levels of quality and such. And so you need to be able to go build those things. So we always started out, we call our everybody's got to anthropomorphize their agent. So we call ours Ava. And Ava is, has tools for all of that, but has the cognition levels and they sort of knows what a good work product is that she's going to go make.
And what are you seeing? So you introduced Ava how long ago? Just a year?
About 6 months ago. Yep.
What are you seeing in terms of adoption? Like how are people who are being kind of using your product, for the better part of kind of 6, 7, 8 years, and now all of a sudden shifting to something that is acting as this kind of autonomous assistant? Is everyone embracing it? Are people reluctant? What's kind of been the reaction so far?
I think we've made a lot of right calls, which is maybe there's some luck and some skill mixed into that, but we have had a really, really welcome reaction to it. We have not had the sort of enthusiasm in our business anyways, in this space, since really when we started. Now, there's a couple things that like I think lead to that. One is that, we're not really serving this sales engineer anymore. We are serving the sales people. So we've moved from like maybe a small pond to the whole ocean. Now we're competing amongst Salesforce and other groups as large as that. And we're winning. So, we have ADP and DocuSign. We have like, some of the best companies in the world here are eagerly using this. But again, I go back to the spaces because we didn't build it in a way that was the end goal was to say, make somebody's that currently is an employee there, give them another tool that they have to use. We built this thing to do that work. So the whole purpose is to let the sales, like instead of giving this to a sales engineer, we want to give this to the salesperson so that they have sales engineer coverage anytime they want it, right? So we're trying to actually get this thing to do the whole job.
So you're not just an assistant sales engineer, you're basically providing an alternative, a substitute for the salesperson who may not have the dedicated 1-to-2 ratio, 1-to-3 ratio. They don't have enough. So they can basically go and autonomously with the assistance of this AI, get at least that first level of information gathering and maybe responses. Is that kind of
That's exactly right. And it's like the sales engineers have to do a lot of things. And so to the extent that we can, and because of that ratio, that's a huge problem everywhere and basically every company. People are like sort of, I don't know if these clamoring is the word, but it is people are very eager to get this going because it augments, it fills this giant hole that there's just not enough sales engineers in any of these orgs. Now these people have 24/7 coverage. Ava can join calls. She can join your Zoom. She can talk to you. She can actually engage in the conversation. She can go produce work product while you're on that call. It's an actual teammate, right? So like I'm trying to specifically really push this idea that like anytime in the engineering team we were debating about features or how should we build this part of it, I always just push this idea like what would a human being do? What would the human do? Go do that. That's our answer. Ava has got to act like a human being. She's got to be able to onboard like a human being, pass tests like a human being, engage in phone calls like a human being, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And how broad of a scope does she have? Is she providing POC preparation and planning, or POV, I think, as the kids refer to it?
Yeah, the whole pipeline. So like, she could do discovery calls with you. She listens to all the transcripts. We have connections with Gong and other things like this too, but she joins the calls. So even if she doesn't talk, she's listening, transcribing, pulling out information. She does character maps of like who is concerned about what things in this company, what is the sales cycle of this company, what are the budget concerns, what are the pain points, what are the different product combinations that we can use to fill those gaps. What are the product gaps, if there are any? Are they big deals, small deals, et cetera? She produced the whole 9 yards, and all the way to the point of, from the intro discovery all the way to the point of the handoff to the implementation team. So that's another big thing that like salespeople have to do. They go through the whole deal, and there's like, hey, what the hell just happened through this entire process that we just went through? Let me go now synthesize everything. Ava just does that, and she produces that, and then it's like the handoff is clean.
And I presume she goes beyond just being able to navigate a graph, a knowledge graph, looking for the right node of information to pull back. She is reasoning. She's, like you said, synthesizing. She's putting information together. But how do you guard against hallucinations?
Yeah, so like a knowledge graph is a good analogy, but a knowledge graph is not a sufficient condition. So if you think about how you break down types of knowledge, that's like the key point, is that there's more than just declarative knowledge in the world, right? So declarative knowledge is like what you could read in a book, right? Like the Library of Congress has a lot of declarative knowledge. But if I now tell you, go research topic X, you have to go learn procedural knowledge to be like, what facts should I go get about Project X, so then I can string together some sort of perspective on that topic. That's procedural knowledge, right? So you can codify procedural knowledge in knowledge graphs in a couple different ways. One way, use the knowledge graph example, let's say you have some piece of knowledge like what the goals of the company are. You're scouting some prospect, they have some goals. Well, a goal, if you just define what a goal is, then you can say, hey, a goal must have a problem, that they have a set of problems that are in the way of achieving that goal. They have some strategy that is how they plan to overcome that problem. And so there's sort of like this triangle of things that are related to each other. So now I could say, well, I discovered a new problem, right? So I'm on a call, Ava's on a call, and she hears somebody disclose that they have this problem. Well, now that problem, a declarative fact, would just be that problem. That would be like a row in an RDS database or something, right? But in a graph, you could say, well, that problem is related to goals in a particular way. So like learning about that problem tells me something about their goals. It also tells me something about their strategy. And because it tells me about these things, it tells me about why they have their strategy the way that they do. So I'm starting to get context around these topics, around these ideas. And so when you get a new piece of fact, it implies something different about some other piece of fact that you have. And that is the early part of the foundation of reasoning, is that you have to define your terms. You have to know what the hell it is you're even talking about before you can start to string together premises to come to conclusions.
But did you have to go get new people to kind of help you shift a little bit into building out this type of agent that has some, I don't know whether you're using reinforcement learning or whatever you're using for building out that reasoning? Was it a different team? Was it just the existing team kind of like relearning certain things?
One of the biggest blessings we had at Vivun was that when I was at Bridgewater running this AI team that was building expert systems, you had a bunch of guys working in knowledge representation, working in expert systems, thinking about, what are the types of knowledge, what is the metadata around that kind of stuff. That whole team basically followed me over to Vivun when we started Vivun. So we were very blessed. I got about like 12 of them or something to come over, and now they're all, the senior engineer, they're all our staff engineers and such. So we've been able to like keep a team of people together over the better part of, 10 years now working on this problem. So we have augmented that staff, of course, but we've had a sort of kernel of a group of people that have been working on these problems for a very long time. And it's really helped out a lot, of course, obviously. But the way that we think about it, like maybe the easiest way to characterize it would be the normal way to think about having LLMs do reasoning is that you throw, let's just say, a document that you're going to go reason about over the document. You throw the document into the LLM, and then you're going to ask the LLM, tell me about this document. Okay. And then people kind of sort of like leap and say, like, that is reasoning. That is the LLM reasoning about what's important in the document to bring it back to you. Okay. So, like, there's some pedantic aspects to that, but we'll move to what I'm saying that I think is a better path, which is to say, I already know what is important in the document. I have a particular thing that I am trying to get out of the document. I am trying to decode certain procedural things, certain declarative things, certain value things that I want it to be in this frame. I want it to, in other words, I want you to read this document from the perspective of this world model. Okay. So I have a model of the world that I want to take this information and put it into. And then I'm going to use the world model to do the reasoning. And so that aspect is just very different. You get two very different things that way. It's just like that, like you and I can watch the same movie and take something different away from it. Well, why is that? It's because we have
Yeah.
different world models. An LLM does not have a world model. There's nothing for it to reason over. So what you have is sort of this, people will debate about whether or not there's an emergent world model in the latent space and all of this stuff. I don't think that there's any good evidence to suggest that there is. It doesn't appear to me that like the symmetries you would expect out of certain very basic world models are being upheld in these experiments that people are producing now, at least out of the language models. JEPA and things like that are different, but in the LLMs, it doesn't appear that it has a persistent world model that comes out of it. And so the question is, what are you reasoning about, if not the world model?
Yeah, so fair enough. And I think I get that. It's still kind of a glorified statistical model with incredible magical power that feels human, but may not pass the Turing test, at least not yet. Eva Dog 1 is out, getting early adoption. You mentioned a couple of clients. What changes with Ava.2?
When we started this pivot, I told the guys that I was like, look, I think that there's going to be two modes in this world. This is a belief I have about everybody working in agents and how AI is going to transform product development. And I think that there are basically two modes. The first one is this reasoning mode. Like, we do better on hallucinations than out of the box LLMs. We do better in domain specific aspects. But obviously, we are explicitly a priori codifying what we mean by certain things. So obviously, we will do better, right? But I think that that is going to be a big moat. My argument there was that you would not get over the threshold with, just the foundational model alone. You need to be specific about what the things you mean in your domain. Your domain has all kinds of specific domain language. And in an LLM, like, the colloquial use of those terms don't mean the same things. They will fall into all these traps and have problems with multi-hop reasoning and all of that. And that's basically come true. So you have what the first moat is, this reasoning moat. But I actually don't think that this moat is a defensible moat. I do think that the LLMs will eventually get there. One obvious way is that right now we a priori codify that knowledge graph or the procedural graph and such so that we can have that reasoning. But that's a manual process. So we sit down with Matt and JB and John Bruce and we extract expert knowledge extraction and codify it through a formalized process that way. That process is very systematic, so it lends itself to AI automation. So I think that as soon as people start to realize, which I think they are, I think Ang just came out with like a whole series on why you should build agents the way that I'm discussing it now. So people are catching on to it. I think Salesforce even started to catch on to it. So I think that this mode is probably not defensible in the long run. It does take a long time to build, and there is a sort of art and process to expert knowledge extraction. There are many, many trappings into codifying or representing declarative knowledge like this or procedural knowledge like this. I think people will more or less do it poorly initially, but it'll take some time. But the most important thing is that eventually you'll have the AI do it for you. And that is when this mode, I think, collapses, is when the AI can actually do expert knowledge extraction, codify it as a graph. That makes it an investigatable thing. It grounds the LLM, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that the second moat, which I do not think is a traversable moat, but it's a lot less, I would say, like defensible in some, or like, value adding in some sense, which is kind of like a personality. And what I mean by this is, like, let's say you and I were both physicists. We both go to some national lab and we both apply for the same physics role and we have the same knowledge and the same everything, right? And who gets picked is almost always the most important feature that gets anybody hired, which is their cultural fit. Do they like you or more? it'll be you. So, you get the gig because they're like, well, Joe's kind of an asshole, and like, this is, and Dimitri's a good guy. So you're like, okay. But assuming all else being equal, like, this is what happens. And I've hired well over hundreds of people in my career, and this is the number one thing that happens. Like, do you like this person? They have to cross the threshold, but oftentimes you will sacrifice somebody that's even better on paper for somebody that is good enough but has as a much better cultural fit. And I think that this is a really important aspect of business. This is a really important part of like the economy of driven by humans, is that we select for people that are like us, that we think are going to fit well with us. And I don't think AI agents are going to circumnavigate that. So I think right now I'm doing a lot of research on what we call like agent psychology. Like, how should it operate? How should it assimilate into a company culture so that it works like everybody else in the culture, so that it doesn't force the humans to change their behavior, but instead changes its behavior to fit in well.
So you want to make Ava more likable, less Ava Brown and more Ava Gardner or something.
Yeah. And likable is a very different thing. Like Bridgewater Associates is a they have a very famous culture, right? It's a very tough culture. It's a very honest, kind of blunt culture.
The transparency, over the top transparency.
Yeah, and so like Ava needs to be somebody very different there than she does at Vivun, at ADP or something like that. Like, these companies all have unique cultures and they have unique language. So Ava needs to be able to adopt that and fold into that. They have different frameworks that are shared amongst the employees there. And that is why companies, like, when the culture is a very important thing. Those shared frameworks create efficiencies for that company.
To some degree, they're going to be annexes or appendages to an organization, right? They're going to be part of your organization. And even in my company, we now see agents as part of different teams, right? They have this roles. Maybe they don't have a W-2. So you see that ability to adapt and accommodate and work with, whether it's a salesperson or a sales team or a particular department, as the next frontier,
Yeah.
above and beyond just that kind of a physical wiring of having a logical and reasonable or reasoning model.
Yeah, I think that basically, like, over the next couple years, at the rate things are going, probably the next couple years, but maybe 2 to 5 years, we sort of lick reasoning in a reasonable way, right, and to a reasonable threshold. And then what you have is basically a sort of convergence of quality of agents coming out into the market. And so the question is like, well, what differentiates this agent versus that agent? My argument is that it will be culture. It will be the same thing that is happening right now with all the recent graduates are having a hard time getting jobs, but you're like, who is getting jobs? It's the people that have the most cultural fit, because they're all more or less the same, and from the eyes of the hiring manager in terms of credentials. And so you bring them in and it's like, who gets fit? Well, it's the cultural fits. It's the people that assimilate well, the people that are passionate about the project, people that augment everybody else around them. And to do that, you really have to have a sense of psychology. You have to know that, like, if we're becoming friends, I have a model of not just you, I have a model of what you think of me. And I will change my behavior to optimize trust, right? You want to optimize trust. So likability is one dimension of trust. Capability is another, autonomy is another. There's lots of dimensions in which you have to optimize for, but you're trying to optimize for trust. You want this thing, you want to talk to Ava and say, like, Ava understands me, not just, she understands urgency, right? Like, if I start to be like, Ava, we need this like right now, people do that. And you're like, is that normal for Joe to behave that way, or is that different?
And to some degree, it's not just in being able to accommodate her interlocutor, like in the company, like she's dealing with outside companies, right? So I think in a similar way, you have to have a EQ if you're dealing with customers or end users. At what point, or do you think there's a point where you say, you know what, instead of giving Ava even more superpowers for Ava 3.0, I'm going to split the role. I'm going to basically create a separate agent to do proof of value, a pre-sales function typically, and maybe further down the road, another one that does architecture. Or do you just create one Uber agent that does everything? How do you think about that problem of orchestration versus kind of division versus kind of one unified agent?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that people can debate about this. There's no reason why you can't have that be a single model. My argument for why it should be a separate model is from human evolution. It is, we all specialize. Like, I'm sort of in the boat where, like, AGI is like a misnomer. Like, there is no such thing as general intelligence. There's like a collection of specialized intelligences. And I think that there's a reason why that happens, namely that it's organizationally convenient. So if I go to my product person, I have a context of dealing with product language. We have a set of different frameworks. I don't have to worry about cross contamination of their views of, marketing or whatever else. Like marketing becomes secondary to the context of product. And that's a really convenient thing that we do when we create roles. That's what we're doing with humans. It's not that like your product person doesn't have opinions or can't reason through marketing efforts. It's that it's secondary to their primary thing. And when I go to the marketing person, that's primary and the product is secondary. And so that's a very convenient way of organizing knowledge specializations. And so I think that people will probably want that same sort of thing just to be able to engage with that. Of course, in the back end, it doesn't really matter if it's the same, set of GPUs running it. It is more of a UX thing. And humans are that way too. Like you go to a dinner and you change your priorities of the things that you think are important versus when you're at work. Why should agents be any different than that?
No, that's a great point. I think we're not really accustomed, except maybe when you're a child living at home with your parents, they seem godlike. So you do have kind of specialization. So this has been great, Joe. Thank you for coming on Control Alt AI. I think for the audience, it's been a terrific kind of thought process around how do you shift, especially if, like many companies are in this kind of B2B SaaS arena, and then along comes AI, and you want to build your first agent, and then you want to kind of see it mature. So I think this has been really instructive. So thank you, Joe, very much. Take care, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Control Alt AI. If you liked today's conversation, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And for more insights on AI, data, and risk, visit bigid.ai. See you next time.